Well, good morning, everybody. It's John Selleck with Harbor Strategic, and today here we're going to be talking to Justin Winslow. He's the CEO and president of the Michigan Restaurants and Lodging Association. His organization has done an in-depth survey of hundreds of its membership, which are the hotels and the restaurants across the state of Michigan. And we know that coming back from the pandemic, it's been a struggle. We lost thousands of restaurants, but it was important for us to check in again, take the temperature of the people who are out there doing the jobs day in and day out. Justin knows that industry inside now, and a lot of the numbers that came back are very concerning. The restaurant industry is in a precarious place, so that in itself is news we want to talk about today. But we also want to remember to think about all this in the framework of the soon-to-arrive decision by the Michigan Supreme Court about the status of the tip credit on the minimum wage, which would affect tipped workers potentially in a vastly negative way by blowing up the system that they choose to use every day to earn far more than minimum wage. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Justin Winslow. Once he walks through the numbers, we'll open things up for Q&A. And then we're recording, so we'll be able to distribute a copy of this for you folks that aren't recording now. And if you haven't already received the press release and the survey documents, we'll be sending those around right after the webinar is over as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Justin Winslow.
Thanks, John, and good morning, and thank you everyone for taking a little bit of time this morning to learn and talk with back and forth with us about the state of Michigan's restaurant industry. Two reasons we wanted to survey right now. This is the first operation survey we have done since May 2022, and back then we were doing it seemingly monthly. A lot of demand from media on where the state of the industry was back then, and certainly we wanted to get a level set of what the impact of the pandemic was back then, but took a pause for a while. But we wanted to get an understanding at this point of and to empirically test what felt like the vibe session that felt negative and in a different, more negative tone than what we're hearing out of the state of the economy nationally, and frankly, the state of the restaurant industry nationally. I think you saw last week some stories coming out about the $1.1 trillion of top line industry revenue in 2024, and that's a big number, the biggest certainly it's ever been. But it wasn't vibing with what we were hearing day in and day out from our members. So we wanted to get some empirical backing to understand where our membership was. And a lot of people on this this call are going to also know that we have been sounding the sirens for a bit on what the potential impact might be to a Supreme Court ruling yet to be laid out. But if it is adverse to this industry, it's going to have a catastrophic effect. And we wanted to understand in the state of the industry right now, how bad is that going to be if adopted amend is ruled unconstitutional and thereby reinstating a very old 2018 ballot proposal that would eliminate the tip credit in Michigan. So we wanted to get level set on both of those things. And I think the top line takeaway from me is that the state of the industry is a lot more precarious than we had understood or anticipated, even hearing those negative vibes from our members right now. And I think the residual impact of the pandemic has had a long tail. We know that, and inflation has remained protracted. We just got new numbers for May that still show a pretty elevated 3.3% from where they were before, and food inflation higher than that overall number. And that core message of protracted inflation is what's driving all of the negativity you'll see in the numbers here in just a minute. So let me try to go into that. We'll go through a few different categories. First, on sales and traffic. We wanted to understand our top line sales up. My anticipation, the anticipation of a lot of our members was going to be that top line sales did go up. If nothing else, food away from home inflation was 4.1% year over year. And that's going to require menu price increases, which were similar to that 4.1% over the last year. That alone should have driven top line sales to increase, but it's not what we're seeing in the data. The data is demonstrating that only 1 in 4 restaurants are actually experiencing revenue growth, top line sales growth over the last year, and almost half, 45%, actually seeing a decrease in their top line sales over the last year. That's pretty concerning considering just the inflationary nature of the environment we're all experiencing right now. And part of that is that traffic is down. Traffic is down considerably for some segments of the industry, down for almost everyone. We do know that 60% of restaurants, 3 in 5, operating with lower traffic than they were a year ago. Fewer people are going into restaurants. Restaurants are a little too expensive for some people, and they're going less often. So you're seeing traffic reduce, which is obviously impacting those top line sales numbers as well, and that is that's concerning, obviously, for the industry. Less people, less bodies in restaurants, and less top line sales coming into restaurants. What does that mean for profitability? I think there's a very, very concerning percentage of restaurants right now in Michigan that simply aren't profitable. In the best of times, this is an industry that operates on a low profit margin. 3 to 5% is what most restaurants can expect to operate with at their restaurant. Right now, we are seeing the majority of restaurants, excuse me, not the majority, almost 40% not profitable at all. And those 40% that are not profitable at all are in very serious risk, with or without an adverse ruling, of going out of business over the next year. And so I think that's a concerning state for the industry. And of those who are profitable, so we do know, at least on some level, most restaurants are still profitable right now. That's intuitively should be what you want to see. But of those who are profitable, 74% of them, basically 3 in 4 restaurants, are less profitable than they were a year ago. That goes back to that same core message. Everything has gotten a lot more expensive for restaurants. We're all experiencing it as consumers. They're experiencing it every day as operators, with massive wage inflation that they have taken in a very short amount of time. For the first 2 years post-pandemic, really 2x of the economy's wage inflation overall. So as wages rose for everyone, they were rising 2 times as fast in the restaurant industry, and that's a lot to absorb, especially in a low-profit industry. So profitability down for many, nearly 40% is a much higher number than what a standard operating normal time one could expect from the restaurant industry. And so those are concerning numbers right there. And we really wanted to weigh in on where inflation was and where the top line concerns. When the last time we did this, workforce challenges were easily, far and away, the number one concern restaurant operators were dealing with. That was 2022. Inflation was creeping its head by 2022 for sure. It's not like it didn't exist. The full weight and impact of inflation in 22 wasn't felt to the degree it is now. 60% of the respondents to this survey reported inflation as their number one most significant challenge. That dramatically outpaced those who still believe workforce challenges are their number one concern. Where only 22% had suggested that their workforce challenges were the number one concern facing their specific restaurant at the time. And traffic, which we just talked about a second ago, at 14%, was the third highest on the most significant challenge rating. But 60% clearly makes the case inflation is what is driving the challenge for restaurant operators right now. It is what is pushing them to the brink of whether they can and will keep their location open or locations open going forward. And that's a real challenge for the industry right now. Don't want to walk past that workforce and staffing still is a real challenge. Michigan has been slower to recover from the pandemic in terms of staffing than most other states. We are in the bottom third of all states, Michigan is, in terms of restaurant industry workforce growth since the pandemic. So we are slower to recover. We are still operating with about 12,000 fewer workers in the leisure and hospitality space than we were before the pandemic. That's concerning. Overall, there are more people working in this industry nationally than there were before the pandemic. That is not true in Michigan. We have stabilized at that number, about 425,000 people in leisure and hospitality. That is about 12,000 fewer than we were consistently operating with before the pandemic. So challenges still exist there. And I think it shows in this poll as well. The majority of restaurants are still operating with inadequate staffing. Nearly 3 in 5 of them are staying closed for either shifts or full days that they otherwise would be open if they had the adequate staffing to meet that demand. So you're seeing a different industry now than we had before. There is still a lot of demand out there, but the supply is still a challenge. Workforce still not quite exactly where you'd want it to be. And again, Michigan lagging some of the other states, and certainly in our region, Michigan is the slowest recovering state on the restaurant side of any state that we border. So slower than Ohio, slower than Indiana, slower than Wisconsin. Workforce continues to be a challenge here. So all of these things are happening right now in an environment where Michigan continues to be one of the 43 states operating with what is called a tip credit. The tip credit is the difference between the full minimum wage and what the tipped worker specific minimum wage is. In Michigan, that wage is 38% of the full wage, and tipped employees will always make at a minimum the full minimum wage. The employer is required to make up that difference at any time where tips don't make up that difference and get a tipped employee, a restaurant server, at least the minimum wage. We know in Michigan the reality is that that's rarely, almost never the case. $30 an hour is approximately what servers are making on average right now in Michigan, wages plus tips combined, so dramatically higher than the minimum wage at the moment. But if an adverse ruling on adopt and amend comes out later this year, for those not familiar, this is a very long legal process about whether what the legislature did in 2018 by adopting two ballot proposals, thereby taking them off the ballot, making them law, but then amending them to modify them, make them a little less punitive to businesses, especially small businesses, whether that practice of adopting and then amending them in that same legislative session is constitutional. One of those two proposals was a proposal to increase the minimum wage and to eliminate that tip credit we just talked about. If adopted amendment is ruled unconstitutional and we have to reinstate a 2018 law onto the books, it is going to have catastrophic, and I can't stress this enough, catastrophic impacts to an industry that is already on the edge. So we are waiting to hear from that ruling, probably somewhere in the next 30 to 45 days from the Michigan Supreme Court. What is going to happen to this industry, especially the full service industry that employs servers? It will be catastrophic. 1 in 5 full service restaurants, according to this survey, said they will just close their doors forever. They're barely profitable if they are at all profitable right now. If you are going to eliminate the tip credit, that will increase wages for those tipped employees 250% overnight. That is catastrophic. They will close their doors, 1 in 5. That equates to approximately 1,000 restaurants. So when we say it's like having another pandemic level experience in Michigan, that's what we can expect for the full service restaurant sector if we are going to see the tip credit eliminated overnight because of a Supreme Court ruling. It has a lot of operators on edge right now. 1 in 5 is a very large number. When we asked this same question in 2022, that number was 1 in 6. So that gives you a sense of how the operating environment has gotten harder. More restaurants are saying, I just don't think I can be profitable. I will shut my doors permanently. What does that mean to employment in Michigan? That means 40 to 60,000 restaurant jobs will be lost in very short order. That is a sizable number. Most of those will be restaurant servers, and you'll see it happen quickly. We know this in real time because in Washington, D.C. right now, they are the jurisdiction out there that we can point to and say they're doing this right now. They recently voted to eliminate the tip credit in Washington, D.C., and the results have been catastrophic right out of the gate. They haven't lost the tip credit completely yet. They're transitioning that loss, but already 3,400 jobs, restaurant jobs have been lost in Washington, D.C. Restaurants are changing their business model, and that has resulted in that 3,400 job loss. That equates in Michigan to over 30,000 jobs lost. So if that's the impact of just the first phase out in Washington, D.C., and just a couple of months into that first phase out, you can get a sense of how dramatic that is going to be statewide in a state the size of Michigan. Again, we think 40 to 60,000 restaurant jobs is where this is going to fall out, and a dramatic reorganization of how this restaurant or how the industry operates as well. We talked about menu price increases as well that have happened over the last several years to keep pace with inflation. Restaurant operators are saying on average they would raise prices another 25% If you are looking for a way to guarantee profitability goes down and traffic goes away, that's a great way to do it. But there's almost no existing tool for a restaurant operator that is trying to stay in business still to do other than a dramatic menu price increase. So that is what is available to restaurants. Again, I think the top line takeaway from us is we knew this industry felt in a precarious position. It's more precarious right now in the status quo, and we would literally be careening off a cliff, heading into the abyss as an industry, if we are going to lose the tip credit immediately because of this ruling. And when you think about Michigan as one of the largest employers in the state of Michigan, almost 500,000 jobs statewide in leisure and hospitality, that is a huge impact to Michigan's economy overall, and a massive impact to Michigan's state budget and how we are going to move forward as a state trying to grow. This is going to send us in the wrong direction. So with that long review of what the data suggests, I'm happy to take any questions that may be out there.
Thanks very much, Justin. It was so important that you laid out not only the precarious position that the restaurants are in, but this cloud that's hanging over us as we wait to see what the Supreme Court will rule on this decision that could come at any time over the next few months. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we anticipate literally any day, but all the way up into the very end of July when the Supreme Court session ends.
We are going to take questions from the many media that are watching today. All you have to do is use the little raise hand button at the bottom, and I'll turn your mic on to ask a question. But we do have one in the chat from WLUC and Marquette. They ask a couple questions, Justin. The first one is, can you talk about how these impacts may hurt rural restaurants, the more mom and pop shops compared to maybe the national chains?
100% true. Small independent restaurants who really make up the backbone of our membership here at the MRLA are the ones who will be impacted the most, that will see the greatest job loss, the ones who are in that 1 in 5 more than any other segment of the industry right now. They don't have the capacity to spread that increased cost out over several locations. Those are the ones you're going to see, those mom and pops most likely to go out of business with this ruling.
And then they had a secondary question, which will apply to everybody. If the Supreme Court does rule against us, essentially against the industry, on adopt and amend, what's the solution that the industry is looking for?
Excellent question. There is nothing that precludes this legislature from finding a legislative compromise, a legislative solution right now that could keep a tip credit, keep these full service restaurants, especially those small mom and pops, open. That is available to them. That's a conversation we've been having with a lot of legislators. It's getting a lot of purchase with those legislators on both sides of the aisle right now. But time is likely short if an adverse ruling comes out, because not to go into the weeds on this case, but it is talking about the ability to adopt and amend in the same legislative session. That was all the way back in 2018. The legislature is well within its right now to make changes to the existing minimum wage law in a way that can avert this crisis.
Okay, and then I'm going to actually activate. These were questions I received in the chat, but Shannon has a follow-up question from Channel 6 in Marquette. Shannon, go ahead. Just make sure you unmute yourself.
Hi, this is actually Audrey, with WLUC. So I guess one more question is kind of like, how do these concerns apply to the UP? You kind of already answered about small restaurants in general, but like the UP is kind of a rural tourism-based economy. So yeah, I just wanted to ask if those effects would be maybe exacerbated in the UP or anything like that.
Yeah, I think not just the UP, but any area that is tourism dependent that has a wide-ranging ebb and flow of restaurant participation, consumer participation in your restaurants based on the season, are going to struggle even more to manage this dramatic cost increase, and how you would choose to operate your restaurant with a 250% increase in your cost of labor overnight. So I think To your point, it's not UP specific, but any area that is going to be that is very tourism dependent is going to struggle even more because offsetting those costs for just a very narrow window of time is even harder with this increase baseline wage for these restaurants to endure.
All right, thanks for that question. We now have a question from Arpan Lobo at the Detroit Free Press. Go ahead.
Thanks, John, and good morning, Justin. One thing I wanted to ask, when the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in this case, one of the things that was kind of, I don't want to say debated, but one of the questions that was asked was, should the justices rule that adopt and amend was unconstitutional? Should there be like a kind of, I guess, like a grace period to enact the wage changes? Have members kind of like reported to the MRLA at all that they've already started planning in the event that if the Supreme Court was to rule against adopt and amend and enact the wage changes immediately? Have you heard that some restaurant owners and operators are already kind of bracing for that in the event that a ruling could come out and the next day, their entire wage scale could change?
Yeah, we certainly hope even in the worst case scenario that you're not talking about immediate effect, that at a bare minimum, you're talking about January 1st of next year. But I know that a ruling, the minimum immediate effect on a ruling like that does at least have a 21-day period. To answer your question, Arpan, and good morning, by the way, a lot of members are preparing a lot of alternative scenarios about what they might do with their workforce and how they might keep their restaurant operating. What you really see happening in areas that have had to deal with this, and there's only a few states, you see a more bifurcated industry where you're either in the higher end experience side of the equation, fine dining, and therefore you're still operating with a full wait staff, or you're really moving to what I call the Panerification of the industry, which is a lot more ordering at a kiosk and then sitting down, and there's a lot less in between there. And I think that's what you might start seeing here in Michigan, and you also might start seeing service charges more as a way for the industry to manage that transition. And that's not great for anyone. The restaurant doesn't want to go down that road. Servers usually make a lower total wage in that scenario than they do under a tip scenario, and it frustrates consumers. So it's not a win for anyone, but there are a few tools that a restaurant operator has to just try to keep those numbers in the black in any way, shape, or form.
All right, thanks for that very much. Now we're going to move on to Samantha from MERS. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, hey, hello, Justin. Hello, John. Thank you so much for having this event this morning. I want to ask, you talk a lot about these restaurant owners being concerned about inflation, being concerned about the cost of their goods. Is there anything else that the state could do that would alleviate some of the financial stresses that they're facing?
We would welcome an industry specific tax credit to help them navigate this system. And I think a lot of flexibility in terms, one of the things that has been really challenging for this industry, it's a little off topic here, but credit card processing is a tremendous cost to this industry. It's usually the third highest cost. It outpaces healthcare costs in this industry because there are so many swipes going on all day long at a given restaurant. Finding some opportunities and some relief on that process, I think, would help merchants like restaurants that are dealing so often with swipe fees and how extensive they have become in terms of their total costs.
I do have a follow-up, if that's all right. How does your organization feel about the ongoing economic development conversation in our state? I mean, there are people looking to reform the SOAR fund to make our state more attractive. I know that restaurants play a role in making a community more attractive. What are your thoughts on this current economic development battle that is going on right now in Lansing?
Yeah, I don't think they're monolithic. I don't think that there's one approach that all restaurateurs have. If you are going to be in an area that's going to benefit from some of these SOAR investments, restaurants are usually going to be downstream of overall development. If there are If there are more people, more jobs, and more revenue in an area, that means more disposable income that can be spent on experiences like going out to restaurants and business dinners associated with restaurants. So that's to the good. If we are taking taxpayer money and making the overall cost more expensive, though, there are genuine concerns out there that somehow it's going to find its way back to these small business operators to foot that bill. And restaurants, knowing how challenged they are right now to be profitable at all, I think are concerned about the impact that might ultimately have on them to foot the bill and make this possible.